Hello and welcome to my podcast on the apocalypse. My name is Steve. In my previous podcast, I introduced the book, The Apocalypse Letter by Letter, a literary analysis of the book of Revelation by Stephen Paul. Today we're going to explore the sixth trumpet from chapter 9 of the Apocalypse. As was mentioned before, the author does not go verse by verse like a traditional commentary, but instead loops around to demonstrate that the evangelist John likewise looped back and forth in his writing. Shown on the screen is a letter from the author to me regarding the typewritten notes he had sent me, 68 pages of them, concerning the open scroll. He spent months on it and covered a lot of ground. His personality and humor were quite evident, and he must have been feeling quite well when he penned it. It reads, "Dear friends of the Lord, the third part of the commentary has been completed. Since the number of its pages is estimated at 130, 260 in typical paperback, the number of weeks to type them at the two-fingered rate is, according to rule of thumb, estimated at 4 weeks, should vision prove durable for that duration. The assiduity of 2 forefingers in concert should induce double vision or the sensation of a bicephalous condition. However, a copious supply of coffee and Boston creams, as experience has proved, will undoubtedly sustain the single-mindedness throughout. Notwithstanding, this answer to the process goes beforehand. The aftermath of it certainly comes into question. In this case, worry would be an otiose emotion, for anticipation not seldom is a false prophet, antagonistic toward true advice. Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. On second thought, the relativity of double vision can be an advantage or disadvantage. Once upon a late afternoon, a broom handle of a woman came walking along the street, sweeping the leaves with her feet, and well, so thin was she, I speak not in derision, one had to knock one's head to double vision, which caused this paradox to leap to light. One sometimes sees things wrong to see them right. If you like surprises, you will have some soon. It cannot be claimed that the commentary was written in commendable style, but it can be asserted that it contains a certain number of things unexplained or misunderstood for 19 centuries, most notably regarding the name of the beast, the woman clothed with the sun, the testimony or martyrion to the nations as unique and therefore differentiated from all other witness or martyria, the 2 kinds of swords, the approximate time for the Battle of Armageddon, the identification of who what restrains the son of lawlessness, the abomination of desolation, the identity of the great eagle, the confederation of the 10 kings, the maximum length of time from the beginning to the end of the second and third woes combined, and thus cross-referred with Armageddon, the approximate time for the advent of the Antichrist, the season, not the exact year, etc., etc., etc. In brief, there has not been penned on paper, nor is there now in print, what this third part of the commentary contains. Your request has been requited as best as human brain and grace of God therein could do. The objective has been twofold, to explain terms and to present the order of events. Those objectives have been achieved, thanks be to God for his permission. After a weekend for rest, the typing will be commenced in earnest, but obviously it will not do to have fingers crossed. Just will not do to have fingers crossed. In chapter 9, verse 13 through 16, John wrote, "Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard one voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God, while they were saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, 'Loose the 4 angels who were bound at the great river Euphrates.' So the 4 angels were loosed, who had been held ready for the hour, the day, the month, and the year to kill 1/3 of mankind. The number of the troops of cavalry was 20,000, 10,000. I heard the number of them." Most versions read "a voice" in verse 13, but the Westminster more accurately reads "a single voice." John wrote phonon meon, which means one voice. At the beginning of verse 14, most versions read saying. The Westminster reads "it said," thus indicating or referring to a single voice. John wrote leganta, which is a circumstantial participle, like legan in chapter 11, verse 1, and it should be translated in English as a temporal clause. But there's a problem. Leganta can be only one of three possibilities: the singular masculine accusative case, the plural neuter nominative, or the plural neuter accusative. Since the participle functions as the subject and the verb of the clause, it follows that it is in the plural neuter nominative, and thus the clause should begin with "as they said," or more accurately, "while they were saying." The participle does not refer to one voice, which is in the singular feminine accusative, but to the only plural neuter noun in the sentence, keraton equals horns. The context corroborates this, for it is obvious that John emphasizes symbolic number 4 by using it 4 times within 3 verses. It is significant that John did not write a voice, but one voice. That one voice came from the 4 horns. John did not mean that 4 voices together sounded as if they were one voice. Rather, he meant that the 4 speaking horns were one voice speaking, i.e., they spoke unanimously. As pointed out in part 2 of this commentary, the golden altar in chapter 8, verse 3 symbolizes the religious orders, but here especially those congregations contemplative, missionary, charitable, and teaching established since the fallen star unlocked the abyss at the beginning of chapter 9. In view of the fact that the symbolic number 4 is so heavily emphasized in chapter 9, verses 13 through 16, the implication is both awesome and ominous. Not the totality of something like the Roman Empire is involved here, as was the case in chapter 7, but the totality of the world. The one voice is not only unanimous, but also universal. The 7th seal marked the completion of the first major phase of the kingdom's revelation or evolvement, that is, the dethronement or decapitation of paganism throughout the totality of the Roman Empire. Then in chapter 8, verse 2, 7 angels were each given a trumpet. This connoted that another major phase of the Father's plan was about to begin. At that point, the reader could only speculate as to whether another large region would be involved or whether the whole world. There were only these 2 possibilities. In chapter 9, verses 13 through 16, John begins informing the reader that the objective of the second major phase is indeed the whole world. Then there can only be one reason why the faithful of the religious orders tell unanimously and universally the 6th angel to loose the 4 angels bound at the Euphrates. Not that the church is making very slow progress, not that the church is temporarily making no progress at all, either merely in a particular region or in the entire world, but that the church is losing ground everywhere, that evil has grown so great as to have become alarmingly advanced, even in the church, in its highest ranks. The faithful of the religious orders will not meet and vote on the matter, obviously. Rather, they will desire in their hearts and think in their minds that God should begin the painful process of removing the many evils on earth and in heaven, the church. Even the faithful among the laity will sincerely pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." When the salt is no longer preserving, when corruption is consuming so many, then it will be time. God knows all, and he has marked the exact hour and day and month and year for the 4 angels bound at the Euphrates to be loosed upon mankind. No one is more exact than God is, no one. Watch the religious orders, they will be the signal. Already their ranks are thin. So amazed at the number of cavalry was John that he did not put the connective chi, or and, after it, but only a comma, to make it clear to the reader that the number is to be understood as literal, but approximate, of course. John added, "I heard the number of them." In John's day, the population of the entire Roman Empire was about 125 million, and 1 out of every 10 could be trained and maintained in the military. The 200 million horsemen, therefore, according to the ancient ratio, which has changed little in modern times, suggests a population of 2 billion. John, by human sagacity alone, would have known that the vision was about an event very far in the future. Those who confine the apocalypse to the Roman Empire are quite egregious in error. John wrote that the riders wore breastplates the color of fire and of hyacinth and of sulfur. The heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. The riders are the agents who command and direct, and the horses are their agencies, especially those political and military. The breastplates signify that the agents' hearts are hardened against all natural law of reason and supernatural law of God. The color of fire here symbolizes hatred. The color of smoke here symbolizes the blasphemies that rise from their hearts. As the fire burns the sulfur, and the color of sulfur symbolizes rebellion against God and the immutable truths he teaches to men, resulting in spiritlessness, generally in the various forms of carnality or sensuality. With these three things, the beast and his followers also be tormented: the fire, the sulfur, and the smoke. He shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mingled with pure wine in the cup of his wrath, and shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment shall ascend up forever and ever. Neither shall they rest day nor night, who have adored the beast and his image, and whoever receiveth the character of his name. From Apocalypse chapter 14, verses 10 through 11. The smoke here is the same kind of smoke that came up out of the abyss at the beginning of chapter 9, and the color of fire alludes forward to the dragon, Satan, in chapter 12. The dragon that is not red, as most translations state, but flame-colored or fire-colored. Thus, John informs the reader of three things. The spiritual origin of the 200 million horsemen is the abyss. The second woe comes as a consequence of the first. The 200 million horsemen are the signal preparation shortly before the advent of the beast and his empire. Mark and hark, the second woe begins with the 200 million horsemen and culminates in the 3.5-year reign of the beast. That the horses' heads are like lions' heads means that those organizations have the authority and power not only to propagandize, but also to devour, to kill. From their mouths issue fire, smoke, and sulfur. From this description, some people have drawn and asserted that John hinted at modern weapons. I do not know whether the seer intended that hint, if such hint there was, although I understand why some people assert it. I do not desire to speculate. I certainly do not want to opine, lest I put in John's mouth words that do not belong there, which would be tantamount to telling God that when I want his opinion, I will give it to him. However, I will assert most boldly and confidently as to what John meant when he wrote, "By these three plagues, the third of the men was killed, and the fire and the smoke and the sulfur which were issued out of their mouths." John had the spiritual always first and foremost in his mind, and so those words meant that sin was the root cause that killed the third of the men, the third of the people, the third of mankind living at that time. The prophetic term plague means a divine judgment or punishment, usually carried out by secondary agents. As people sow, so shall they reap. The wages of sin are death. However, the Greek noun plague does not mean plague strictly speaking, but blow, stroke, impact. The reason this term is translated as plague arises from the fact that in the Apocalypse, the term connotes the blow or stroke of the sword of God. That is, the justice of God applied in the form of punishment to men for their sins. Indirectly, John has told the reader that the proper punishment for sin is sin itself. The pandemic death and destruction inflicted by the 200 million horsemen will be, quite frankly speaking, the externalization of the hearts of billions of people. The very enormity of the event speaks for itself, and yet the majority of the people living at that time, like every majority in the past, will fail to perceive the event's significance. In verses 20 through 21, John conveyed this fact bluntly, and the rest of the people who were not killed by these plagues did not repent. History repeats itself because human nature does. It's still the same old story, as the old song says, and it will continue the same in kind, but worse in degree and extent until the little lamb makes heaven new and so the earth. Twice directly, once indirectly, John mentioned that the third of mankind was killed. This percentage is literal but approximate. When Stephen Paul wrote this, there were 6 billion people in the world. In the event of the 200 million if the event of the 200 million horsemen began then, 2 billion human beings would die. As for the number of the injured, homeless, starving, it is a question. Until the invention of the train, the horse was the swiftest means of movement for human beings. The symbolism of the horses was intended to convey the idea that the combatants will spread violence quickly from nation to nation, from region to region. The implication then is that the third of mankind will be killed in a relatively short span of time. Bear in mind John's use of the definite article. It refers to the people living at that time when the event begins. Indeed, the phrase carries the meaning of that third of those people. Common sense understands that some of the total population will die from natural causes, but also that the total population will increase because of births. This means that demographics is useful more towards reckoning the event's geography, not its duration. In round numbers, Asia has a population of 3.35 billion, Europe 1 billion, Africa 0.65 billion, South America 0.52 billion, and North America 0.38 billion. The total human population of the Earth was 6 billion. The populations of Asia and Africa combined account for 2/3, or 4 billion. If that of Europe is added, then the amount becomes 5/6, or 5 billion. At present trend, Europe's ratio of births to deaths is -0.5%. Hence, even without compounding the negative rate, it is expected that Europe's population will decrease from 1 billion to 0.75 billion by 2050 AD. On the other hand, if the populations in Asia and Africa increase for the next 50 years at only half the rate of the past 50, then their populations combined will increase from 3.35 billion to 6 billion. Thus, their total population and ratio to Europe's would be 8:1. And if the historical rate of increase continued for that same period, the ratio would become at least 10:1. Whatever set of figures is used, the result points to Asia as the main location for the event. It is most ominous that the 4 evil angels are bound at the Euphrates River in Southwest Asia. As for the duration of the event, the phase, the third of the men, can be fulfilled only if the third is killed before more than 2/3 of the men die from other causes. Births after the event begins are irrelevant. And so at this point, the text indicates only that the event cannot last longer than, say, 40 to 50 years, a piece of information too vague for value in regard to even approximating what the event's actual duration will be. John emphasized something else that again gives the spiritual perspective. The most important point in chapter 9, verses 13 through 21 is this: the 4 horns of the golden altar initiated the second woe. In the beginning of chapter 7, a very holy bishop commanded 4 good angels to hold back the 4 winds, which by the end of their succession would affect the totality of the church. Here, in contrast, the 4 horns commanded the 6th angel to release the 4 evil angels, which affected the totality of the world. The church incurred the 4 winds, later represented as the first 4 trumpets, upon herself by the Arian heresy, and by the consent to it by the vast majority of bishops at the Council of Rimini in 359 AD. The world incurred the 4 evil angels upon itself by opposing the church in her primary mission to teach and to baptize all nations. The latter half of this last statement requires an explanation. In the book of Daniel, a horn symbolized a king or kingdom that belonged to a larger kingdom as part to whole or quondam whole. For example, in Daniel 7, the 4th beast represented the Roman Empire, and the 10 horns on its head symbolized the kings or kingdoms into which the Roman Empire would become subdivided. In Daniel 8, the great horn on the he-goat fell off, and then 4 smaller horns grew out of the goat's head. The 4 horns symbolized the 4 Seleucid kings who subdivided the Greek Empire among themselves after the death of Alexander the Great. To the concept of the horn as part of a larger entity, John added the concept of the horn as authority and power subordinate to a higher entity. For example, the 10 horns on the 7th head of the beast in Apocalypse 13 and 17 represent the 10 kings who are subordinate to the beast. Secondly, the 7 horns on the head of the little lamb in chapter 5 symbolizes an indefinite number, the priest subordinate to Christ who sends the Holy Spirit, 7 eyes, through them unto the whole church by the 7 sacraments. Thirdly, in chapter 13, the beast ascending from the earth, The second beast, identified in chapter 9, verse 20 as the false prophet, has two horns, which symbolize the power and authority in religious and secular agents and agencies subordinate to him. It is an important point, then, that the command to loose the four evil angels at the Euphrates came from the golden altar's four horns, not directly from the throne of God. As will be seen later, the beast will commit offense directly against Christ on the throne in particular, not just against the church in general, and thus the command for the beast's destruction will come directly from Christ on the throne. It is implicit, therefore, that the golden altar has borne the brunt of offense up to the time of chapter 9, verse 13. Hence, it is right and fitting that the four horns issue their unanimous command to loose the four evil angels. Nota bene, the exactitude of God in his justice and mercy. The four horns hold rank higher than that of angels, and so the punishment for offense should have been measured justly so. But mercifully, only four evil angels were loosed. The evil angels incited the event to a magnitude greater than what man by himself would have done. And this is justice, but the magnitude of the event was not as great as it could have been, and that is mercy. When I said that the enormity of the event speaks for itself, I spoke inaccurately, for the event's enormity does not indicate by half what evil men will be doing at that time. The reader should not be shocked at the killing of the third of the men. Rather, let the reader be shocked that it was, or will be, not more than the third. Think then, the beast and his followers, who will be of immense majority, will incur the exactitude of God in full and just measure. Stephen Paul wrote this around 1998. He was speaking of a time not far in the future. Do you see anything to indicate we haven't gotten closer to this time? The book is found at theapocalypseletterbyletter.com, and a discount code is provided at the top of the page. Till next time, may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you and keep you.